Hi, this is Randal, Schwartz, host of Floss Weekly. This week, Dan Lynch joins me. We're going to chat about Delta3D, a giant simulation engine that's used by military people, but we can use it as civilians too. You're going to want to hear about this, so stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Floss Weekly is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Floss Weekly with Randal Schwartz and Dan Lynch. Episode 177 for August 10th, 2011, Delta3D. This episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by Netflix. Watch thousands of TV episodes and movies on your PC, Mac, iPad, iPhone, or TV instantly. All streamed directly to you, saving you time, money, and hassle. For your free 30-day trial, go to netflix.com/twit. It's time for Floss Weekly, the show about free, libre, open source software. I am your host, Randal Schwartz, MerlinStoneNinja.com, bringing to you each week, the movers, the shakers, the big projects, the little projects, the projects that are actually kind of big, but you might not have heard about. And this is what we have today. But before we bring on our guest today, let's go ahead and bring on our co-host, Dan Lynch. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Very good, very good. So, Dan, we've got a really interesting guest today. It's a project that has a military start, but has some civilian applications as well. This is Perry McDowell is going to join us today. We're going to talk about the Delta3D project, which sounds like an invasion force, but really it's a set of software that brings together various components, like the, well, when you have to do like a military simulation to be able to train people or to be able to test whether things are going to work or not, you have to have things that do like graphics and make the graphics all work, and physics engines to make sure that when things collide, they blow up properly and things like that. So what Delta3D is a collection of other tools with a lot of glue code in between to sort of make it so that you can build an entire simulation for training purposes or just simulation purposes or conversation pieces or whatever. And so it should be a pretty interesting show. I know you've done a little bit of research on this. Am I portraying it accurately?
Yeah, pretty much. I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I have been reading up a little bit on this afternoon. It sounds like a really fascinating project, so I can't wait to hear more about it.
Very good, very good. And before I get on with everything, first I have to say thank you again to Media Temple for providing me the giant mic that you see to my left if you're watching the video, and the place to kind of get quiet here for a while and give me a little bit of time off work so I can come and actually do this show. They're not really a sponsor, but they do actually provide me free tea. It's, oh, by the way, it's PG Tips again, very good stuff. But also we do have an actual sponsor for this show, a sponsor that I actually really respect because I am a customer. So this episode of Floss Weekly is in fact brought to you by Netflix. Netflix streams thousands of TV episodes and movies directly to you instantly, which means you save time, money, and hassle. There are several easy ways to instantly access streaming movies and TV shows with Netflix. You can watch Netflix movies and TV shows on your Mac or PC or iPad. I do that with my laptop whenever I'm in hotel rooms, as long as I've got a decent bandwidth coming in. You can also watch them on your iPhone and some Android phones as well. I have my iPhone app, and when I'm traveling along in mass transit and I can get a good 3G signal, I can actually watch real TV and movie shows directly there on my iPhone. If you have a gaming console like an Xbox 360, a PS3, or a Nintendo Wii, you can watch Netflix right on your TV. And I have a PS3 when I'm in Portland, and I watch Netflix directly there. And if you're not a gamer, you can watch Netflix on your TV with an Apple TV box or a Roku box. They're inexpensive and easy to use. I have the $100 Roku streaming box, and it works really fine for Netflix as well. With Netflix, you can watch movies and TV shows instantly using any of these devices, and you can begin watching a movie or show on one device, then finish on a different one. It remembers your position. It's really nice that way. Whichever way you choose to access Netflix, you can watch as many movies and TV shows as you want, anytime you want, and you can cancel anytime. And because this is an open source show, I do want to say that we do have rumors that Netflix will be coming to Linux soon. Not directly any date yet, but that would be really cool for those of you that are on the Linux world, right? So try Netflix today for 30 days free. Go to netflix.com/twit, T-W-I-T. Be sure to use this URL when you sign up for your free trial, netflix.com/twit. That will let them know that you came from us. We thank Netflix for their support of Twit and Floss Weekly, and we hope you enjoy watching instantly with Netflix. So let's go ahead and bring on our guest, Perry McDowell. Welcome to the show.
Great. Thank you very much for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Great, great. And I gave probably a really bad description of Delta3D, just from the quick amount of time I've had to go over my show notes at the beginning of the show. So let's start by saying sort of give us the 30,000-foot view, which actually might be literal in this case, of Delta3D and how it came to be.
Okay, great. Delta3D is an open source game engine that we've built here at the Naval Postgraduate School. And the best way, I guess, to understand why we did this is to kind of go back to a story, I guess the genesis story of Delta3D. In 2002, we had a couple of Marine Corps students who were going through the program here in MOVES, and they wanted to build basically a forward observer trainer. Forward observer is the guy who stands on a hill and tells the artillery where to drop the shells on the bad guys. And you know, it's a very perishable skill, and they thought it'd be great if they could build a desktop or a laptop version of that would train Marines out, you know, after they've gone through their pre-deployment training while they're on deployment, so that if they're ever called in to use these skills, you know, they're fairly fresh in their mind. And we had some proprietary software that we were using for another project, and they built it on that, and it turned out great. You know, better than we could have hoped. The Marine Corps Training Systems Division, PM Traces, really liked it, and they said, "This is great. We want to give this to every Marine, because every Marine can be called on to do fire calls." And the problem was that the software that we built not only had a $10,000 a seat engineering license, it also had about $1,000 a year runtime license. So if the Marine Corps tried to give this to every Marine, you know, it would have cost them a number with far too many zeros, and they just couldn't do it. So, and that got us thinking, because, you know, we really like it when our students come up with some, you know, a great idea, because they're really the subject matter experts. Our students here are generally officers with between 5 and 12 years of service before they come here, and they've spent time in the field, in the fleet, you know, basically doing the things that most people consider military officers to do, out there fighting wars and stuff. And so they know the problems that are out there. And we love them to come in and come up with good ideas, but we also like the ability for these ideas to translate and be used later on down the line. And that software didn't allow that to happen.
Okay.
So that really got Rudy Darkin, who was their thesis advisor, and Eric Johnson, who is now the technical director of Delta3D, but at the time was you know, a programmer here who had worked with them on their project, thinking, they said, there has to be something out there that's better than this proprietary system, you know, at least has better licensing. This proprietary system was kind of built from the days of when simulation was done on giant SGI machines. And, you know, the machines cost $500,000 to $1 million, and, you know, had, you know, maintenance fees in the tens of thousands of dollars a year, and it, you know, the $2,000 was just really a round-off error. But if you could do the same.
I actually taught a lot of classes at SGI, so I'm really familiar with this level of hardware from there, and it really is amazing how the hardware in my commodity laptop now far exceeds the stuff that we were doing with those really expensive machines back then.
Oh yeah, I mean, you know, when you look at it, it's you know, simulation for the most part can be done on, you know, $1,000 to $2,000 laptop nowadays. Simulations that far exceed what you could have done back then on a machine that cost $1 million and was really the size of a refrigerator or larger.
Now let me make sure I understand this then. So what the original application is you know, I'm a forward observer trying to see where things should be attacked. Now, how does the simulation help with that? Am I looking at what I would see through field glasses then on the screen, and then there's some physical properties of that, and maybe some explosions happening, so I can kind of get a sense of the real world there?
Yeah, it was done very well. They did a full cognitive task analysis, examining what a forward observer would do in the real world, and kind of stripped away the skills that could be taught inside a computer simulation. So it didn't teach them how to take cover or anything, but what it did do is it was, you know, very similar to what you see as a first-person shooter computer game, where you had icons. You could click on your binoculars, you could click on your laser rangefinder, you could click on your map, and so you knew what your position was. We had enemy vehicles that were transiting within your view far away, and then you had to basically go in there and come up with the call. Basically, you would make the radio call via the keyboard and mouse interface, put in all the data that you would actually make to an artillery battery to tell them to fire there.
Would
So
you also
then
have
they
to
would
make decisions like what's the most immediate threat, and even maybe some friend or foe decisions through that?
Yeah, very much so. You have all those decisions to make. You have to, decide whether, for example, it's friendly. It's danger close, which means that there's friendly forces within 600 yards of where you're telling them to fire. You have to determine what kind of ammunition to use. If it's troops out in the field, you're using different ammunition compared to if it's, armored vehicles, something like that. And then what would happen is after they fired, what you would actually have to do is, the way it works is that the artillery battery kind of fires one shot, and you see where that landed, and then you basically tell them, a direction and a distance correction. And then, they make those changes and fire another one. And if they actually land on the target, then you say fire for effect, and all the guns start firing at that point.
And so this simulation actually showed artillery flying in the air, things like that?
You wouldn't see the artillery actually flying in the air, but what you would see is the explosion caused by the artillery.
Okay. So there was, now getting back to the story then, so there was a proprietary version of this, a very expensive one that you couldn't deploy because it was like $2,000 a person. I'm curious, the $10,000 for developer seat, what language was that? Was that Smalltalk by any chance?
No. This was a proprietary system that was built by a company. They've asked us, I've told the story a few times. They've asked us not to mention their name, I think, because they're kind of embarrassed by it. But, that they still had such a silly business model when the business had changed so much.
Okay, so at some point here you decided, okay, we want to be able to redo this and get away from this expensive per seat cost. So what was the process next? What happened, and who got involved and how?
It really was Eric Johnson and Rudy Darkin, as I mentioned earlier. And Eric was the one who started looking, and he was looking. At that point, we weren't even thinking about open source. We definitely weren't open source zealots at that point. And for the military, it wasn't even necessarily something cheap, because the military is willing to pay for what it gets. It generally has money, but it has to be something that's scalable. It was really the change in the business model had gone from, instead of having, one simulator, to now you could have literally millions of them, and you had to have a business model that would scale that way. And so they were looking out at systems that were out there that would do that. And there were some, but they were still pretty expensive, more than we would want to pay as a research organization. And really at that point, there were no top-of-the-line game engines that were open source. Now there are several out there, but there weren't really any at that point. But what Eric found is that there were several different open source libraries and projects that each did, one of the things that a game engine does. So, for example, OpenSceneGraph, did visualization very well, and that's part of the game engine. And OpenAL did audio very well. Open Dynamics Engine did physics very well, and so on. And, he kind of had the idea that, hey, if I take about 10 or a dozen of these things and tie them all together into a single API, I'd have a pretty good game engine. And so, and that's kind of what we've done over the years. And as we've kind of got about 10 to a dozen open source projects that are part of Delta3D at any one time. We have the Python language in there. We have HawkNL, which is a networking component. Several others besides the ones I've already mentioned. And those really make up Delta3D. So Delta3D is a project that is really a collection of, it's an API for a collection of libraries, plus we've written our own code to do things that we have not been able to find good open source projects that do the same thing that we want to do there.
That sounds very cool, and something that that crops up in my mind when we're thinking about this is we like to promote, obviously, collaboration in open source and all that kind of stuff. Because you're a government agency, is any of this kind of sensitive? Is it make it more difficult for you to collaborate with other people and what they can see and what they can't and so on?
No, not really. we haven't done anything that's technically classified, but some of the things people don't necessarily want distributed. And so basically, we follow the license. We're licensed under the LGPL, and we deliver the source code to our customers, but we don't necessarily put, things that are, for official use only or other things like that people would have a problem with getting out into the public into the engine. But, for most of the things that we add to the engine, are things that, it doesn't matter per se, from a classification standpoint or anything like that.
Mm. So what license are you using, and why did you choose that license then?
We're using the LGPL, the Lesser GNU General Public License, and it was a long time ago, and I guess the main reason we started using that was because most of the libraries that we had started putting together into Delta were licensed under the LGPL, and we did that. And we also like the idea, but it's actually one thing that I wish I could claim credit for that we had thought of early in the project, but we didn't, but is actually kind of nice, is that because it's the LGPL, you can take out certain parts of it and plug in other libraries. So for example, I've mentioned that we do physics with the Open Dynamics engine, but there are people who have taken out ODE for the physics because it hasn't really met their needs, and they've plugged in other engines, such as the PhysX engine that used to be made by Aegea and is now part of NVIDIA, or the Havoc physics engine into that, if they've needed. So people who've needed something, kind of beyond the commodity open source solution, if there's a better proprietary project out there, they're able to put that into this, but still use everything else that Delta3D provides.
Well, that sounds excellent. So you've got the modularity there that you can, go and plug other things in. That sounds very, very useful. You're actually kind of, you're a government employee, aren't you? You're backed by a government agency. So one thing that I was curious about is, does that affect the development, having that security of knowing that you will have funding and so on? Does that give you more freedom to develop things in the way you want to, or do you still have the same problems that the rest of us have with that?
Yeah, no, unfortunately, while I am a government employee, I'm a research associate here at the Naval Postgraduate School, and research faculty, our salary is not guaranteed at all. So I have to work, I and my entire team, I've got about 6 or 7 programmers who work for me, a couple of artists, is I need to go out and find projects that will pay my salary and their salaries for this. So, basically we have to go find generally other government agencies. We've done some work for companies, Lockheed Martin and EADS in the past, but most of our work comes from the federal. But I have to find somebody who's willing to pay us to produce a project for them. And when I do that, we basically take the money that we would normally spend on licensing software and we improve the engine. And, quite often what it does, it's difficult to do because, they're fairly strict on what we can do with this. So all the changes that we make to the engine have to support the project that's paying our bills. And so, we can't just go off and add anything to the engine. There's lots of things that we'd like to add to the engine that would make the engine, much better and much more usable, we think, but we haven't necessarily found a project to pay the bills for that.
Mm. Oh, right. Okay. That's an interesting way of doing it. It sounds like it's very similar to the usual kind of open source development model. I was curious how it differed. So a lot of your stuff it renders with OpenGL, doesn't it? So you're kind of rendering through OpenGL. I was following some of the OpenGL community stuff last year, and there was some unrest in the community about the future of the project, and there seemed to be developers who weren't happy and so on. Did you see any of that, and did it worry you at all that the OpenGL might have some problems and people might try and start using other things? Because it seems that's a really core component for you.
It is a really core component. And we didn't really get worried too much by that. There's a lot of talk. I mean, if something had actually happened and, something else had come out to try to replace OpenGL as, an open standard or something like that, that might have been, we would have had to worry about that. But that's really kind of more of a problem for, the underlying Open Scene Graph library, since everything that we do through OpenGL is through or almost everything is through Open Scene Graph. That would be something that, the people who run Robert Osfeld, who runs Open Scene Graph, would have to make the decision for that. And as long as he kept Open Scene Graph up to the same level of, that it's providing now, based upon whatever might happen to OpenGL, it wouldn't have affected us too much, at least directly.
Excellent. Yeah, yeah. So how has Delta3D kind of progressed as an application beyond what you originally thought you were going to do with it? Has it gone past the forward spotter kind of scenario?
Oh, yes. Yeah, we've built several things for it. Right now, we're building a counter-piracy game to teach prospective commanding officers at the Surface Warfare Officer School at Newport, Rhode Island, basically how to do counter-piracy, because that's a mission that the Navy hasn't had to do. I guess it started at probably about 5 or 6 years ago, but, before that, we haven't done much of that. And so a lot of the people who are coming up to be COs have never done that before. They've done similar things, but, counter-piracy has some nuances to it. So we're building a game to kind of teach them how to do that. It's being used by the Navy Recruit Training Command. And this was a game that we didn't build ourselves. It was actually built by a group at Alliance Science and Technology for BBN Technologies, which is now part of Raytheon. And that's used to train recruits how to do firefighting, damage control, other things that they do before they go into their final crucible event called sea trials.
Excellent. So it really has expanded into all kinds of areas that you didn't envisage at first, which seems to be a common story amongst a lot of not just open source programs, but particularly open source programs, that people find other uses for them and they grow in ways that the originators didn't intend, didn't expect, I should say, which is very cool. So when you need to kind of deploy this, so to say, do you have to give the users a specialized laptop or something which has it working, or do they have to use it from a server, or what kind of stuff do they need to really use the simulation software?
Really, I mean, most of our stuff is just built with normal Windows installers. Most of our clients, still use Windows, even though Delta3D is multi-platform. It runs on Windows, Linux, and can also run on OS X. We don't guarantee OS X, but one of our main developers outside our shop is a Mac user, so he generally makes sure that it will run on a Mac after we put out a new release and everything. And so most of the things what you do is just like, a regular game is you have a Windows installer, you run that, and the application installs on your computer. If it needs to be networked, one of the things that we have that's a little different is we also have DIS networking or HLA networking, which are two networking standards that are used quite a bit in the military modeling and simulation community. But we also have a more standard client-server architecture that is used in the game community. So we kind of we choose the networking for what's best for the application that we're building.
Yeah, well, that makes total sense. So you mentioned that when you started out on this road, there weren't many very useful kind of 3D engines, open source 3D engines out there now, and that situation's changed a little bit now. I know some of the guys at the Blender Foundation in Amsterdam, they're doing the Blender game engine and things like that. So do you look at those other projects that have come up now and get ideas from them, and how would you compare what Delta3D does with what they do?
Yeah, there's several very good open source engines out there right now. Blender is kind of morphed from just being a modeling tool to something that actually they have their own game engine, and that's very good. Ogre is out there. Ogre's not technically a game engine. It's just really a visualization engine, but they're starting to move that in different directions, and that's probably the top of the line rendering things that's out there that's open source. Yeah, we do look at them, not too closely. But, if somebody does something that's really neat, we try to put it in. We also look at commercial game engines and see what they have out there. And, we've really added, a lot of things that I think kind of take us away from being a commodity solution and really make us, we have some things that are very good that are designed to really help developers build games. So we've added Director, which is a node-based graphical programming environment. So that means that you don't really have to go through all the issues of coding in C++. You can do a lot of graphical coding there, and so that lets people who aren't necessarily programmers create applications and then you have the option, if that code, that script code is fast enough, you just leave it as is. If it's not fast enough, you give it to a programmer and say, this is exactly what I want to have happen. Write native C++ to make this happen. That's fast. And so, that kind of works out very nicely.
I was going to ask about that, actually. So when you have someone with domain knowledge, like I know how the tank goes over these kinds of hills, and I know how the shot would fire or ricochet or whatever. What's the bridge between that level of domain knowledge and what you have to be able to tell the engine to make it represent it properly?
Okay, yeah, that's a really good question. And that's one of the things that we'd like to, when I mentioned there were things that we couldn't put in there, for several years we've wanted to make it much simpler to use so that a non-programmer could take Delta3D and use it. Or even a non-technical person. Right now, with Director, you can be a non-programmer, but you still have to be fairly technically oriented to use it. But we're changing that. And actually, for the counter-piracy game, we're delivering two tools. Our main tool that we have in Delta3D is Stage, which is our simulation terrain and game editor. It's very similar to a level editor. If you've worked with game engines before, very similar to one of those. And so. But the nice thing about that is that's completely plug-in architecture now. We had one of our users, this wasn't something that was actually done by us, but an outside developer went back in and completely redid Stage in a plug-in architecture. That was incredibly helpful to us. And so now we've done that. And generally, if when we deliver a product, like for example this counter-piracy game, we're delivering it with a specialized version of Stage, two specialized versions actually. One is for the instructors to be able to go out there and kind of put the ships where they want them and do that. The other one is for the technical staff at Surface Warfare Officer School, so that they can actually kind of build behavior, something that the subject matter experts, the instructors, will have to tell them what behaviors they want, but we couldn't come up with a good way to make it simple enough to build complex behaviors. So we kind of came up with two of those, one for people who have technical knowledge and they can build it, build the behaviors, and then the instructors will take those behaviors and attach them to objects in the level editor, and then that way you'll have a pirate vessel that will behave as whatever the latest version of the pirate vessels are behaving.
And now that's another level of interesting questions then. So how much of this has to be driven by an instructor who's sort of reacting in real time to the players in the game, and how much of it can be automated with some sort of AI, and what access would that AI have to the environment?
Yeah, that's another really interesting question. Is for this thing that we're building, one of the requirements was that the instructor not have to watch the student play, because they don't have enough instructors to put one instructor over the shoulder of each student. So what we're doing is this is a research project out of the Office of Naval Research, their Technical Solutions branch. Stephanie Everett's our point of contact there. And we're working with a small company from up in Woburn, Massachusetts called Aptima. And they have quite good, it's called a performance measure engine. And so basically we pass them over the network what is happening, what the student is doing, and they compare that. It's essentially AI that determines, how optimal were the student's behaviors, marks this down, and then basically will come up and report that to the faculty at SWAS, so that the faculty will get a report that, 10 students played the game, and, student A did it, got a score of, 87 because he did, these things right and these things wrong. Student B got a score of 95. She did these things right and these things wrong. And so they can go back and perform remediation with the students if they do anything wrong, to kind of get the wrong ideas out of their heads.
So that's using AI for analysis, but is there also some AI then in real time being used to alter the behavior of the non-player characters?
Yes, very much so. And that's what we're kind of using the director to build that. So basically, we come in there, and we've built an AI process into Delta3D several years ago that was based on Jeff Orkin's AI for the game FEAR that won several awards for its AI. And he's published scholarly papers. I think he got his doctorate at MIT, or at least a master's there. And so it's basically just a planning algorithm. And before it required C++ programming to basically go in there and modify, put in everything that you wanted as the prerequisites for an action to occur and how that action affected the world. But we've modified our director so that now you can do that graphically, and that's fairly easy to do. And that's what we're going to be giving to the technical staff at FLOSS. So, because one of the problems with training games is that as soon as you deliver them, they're out of date. Because tactics change, either our tactics or the enemy's tactics, that sort of thing changes. So we wanted to make sure we gave them the tools to keep the game up to date, and they could respond to whatever changes occurred out in the real world.
Now, is this all person versus scenario, or are there cooperative games or head-to-head games available as well?
No, right now this is just person versus scenario. We don't have any networking in it, so you're just controlling your own ship and telling your own ship to do. But you may be able to get information from other coalition ships or aircraft that are out there via the normal. Or we're simulating the normal network that they have out there, but it's not a two-person game or anything like that yet. Hopefully they'll like it and they'll want to do some follow-on versions, and that may be something that we'd add to, but not right now.
Now, how prevalent is Delta3D then within this sort of training and simulation stuff? Is this like the only project of its kind, or is it like one of 17 different projects, and is it the only open source one? What's the usage base here?
Yeah, as far as I know, it's the only open source one that's being used in a fairly widespread manner. Probably the preeminent simulation that's game type simulation that's being run out there right now is VBS2, a proprietary system from Bohemia Interactive that works fairly well, and that's been funded quite a bit from the military to add capability to it. We kind of face the same thing that we do in a lot that any open source project does, is trying to convince people that that the open source gives you a lot of benefits. VBS2 was built on the game from several years ago, probably like 2000 or about in that range, Operation Flashpoint, and it's improved over the years. But and so they've put quite a bit of money into that and improved it, and it's a very good project product that's out there. And right now, it's meeting the needs. But I feel that all the open source, all the advantages of open source that Delta3D provides in the long term would be making a much better product. But right now, VBS2 is really, the 800-pound gorilla of systems like Delta3D, and we're doing that. Delta3D is widespread. Most people, I think, in this world know of it. VBS2 has a DoD-wide license, so to build an application on it, you don't need to pay anything for it right now. So that makes it a little bit difficult with getting new people, because normally the entryway to open source is the cost, and right now that's not an issue for DoD. When VBS2 comes up for recompete in a few years, then that may become an issue, but as of right now, it's not one.
Now let's talk about the open source nature of this. So I presume the primary consumers and the primary contributors are all within your organization at this point. Is there a lot of activity outside of that realm? Is Delta3D being adopted by, say, maybe gamers or something to build, not military games, but like, civilian games, I guess, where there's a lot of explosions, I guess, first-person shooters and so on? Or is it still pretty much just your organization and the code's just open and you're trying to figure out where this is going to go next?
No, we estimate that we have probably about 5,000, what I call direct developers, because that's how many more downloads we get when we put out a new release over the 2 weeks after we release it, then we would get, over a normal 2-week period. So we figure those people are, followers and they download it. So it's being used by quite a few people out there. I would say it does primarily have a military bent, but it's actually been used by civilian companies to build a car trainer. To do that. So, a driving trainer, one company in France did it so that you can kind of drive around the roads in Paris, that you would go drive on for your, whatever the French equivalent of the DMV is, to kind of get a handle on that. There are some gamers that are using it out there, but, we don't require anybody to register when they download it. We try to put as few barriers to adoption as possible. So, if it is being used out there, the only way we, find out about it is by, doing Google searches or seeing it mentioned somewhere on a blog. And, it's kind of weird. Even in the military world, there's the primary training conference is ITSIC, the Inter-Service Industry Training, Simulation, and Education Conference. And, we go to that every year. When I walk around at people's booths, sometimes I'll see a booth that, I've never heard of this company before, but, I'll go in, I'll see, is that, what are you using for that? And so we're using Delta3D, and, it'll be great because, I'll find out somebody else who's using it. But, so we don't know everybody who's using Delta right now.
That's really interesting, because one of the things I get asked most as a kind of an open source free software advocate is, where are the open source games? Why aren't there more open source games and things? And I know you're doing very serious simulations here, and not, I don't know whether you would call them games or not, but it has the same technology behind it. And I'm curious to know, people keep telling me when I ask games developers and so on that I know, where are they? They say the tools aren't there. But from what you're saying, it sounds as though there are a lot of tools there. Maybe, do you think that's fair as it is? Do you think there's another reason why there's not been as much open source kind of development in the gaming area?
I think that is, how to put this? It's, gaming is such a cutting edge thing. They're always looking for, the most polygons, the most way to play games with shaders and everything. That, and I would say Delta3D, we're not on the cutting edge. We're not up there with Crytek or Unreal or, the Valve's engine that uses Half-Life or any of the other greatest ones out there. And so I think that's why, when you're looking at the projects that are being made, why they have that, it's, people are, if you're talking about, really the AAA titles, you're talking about, an investment, upwards of $50 million. And when you're putting out that kind of money, you don't want to take the risk of using something that's open source, especially since, a lot of the advantages, the ability that it's open, that people can go and change it, that, you share with people, are things that you don't necessarily want, out there. Those are, your competitive advantages, is kind of keeping those things away, or at least people see them as such when they're building games. So I would say, that, the greatest things that are out there probably aren't at the level of, the top-notch game engines that are available. So that's probably why you aren't seeing the highest ones, why you're not seeing more coming out of the, the hobbyist game developers or something like that. I'm not sure about that. A lot of things is that, they've also opened up, like, for example, you can get the Unreal 3 engine freely available, not have to pay a licensing fee as long as you don't make more than $5,000 on it. So a lot of the game companies have put things out there to kind of get the people of tomorrow using their tools, so that they'll stick with Unreal, and when when actually some company sees them and wants them to come work for them because they've built a great hobbyist game.
Yeah, that does make sense. It's something that I hear a lot from a lot of people who listen to the shows that I do are young people interested in getting into games development, and they say, I've tried developing games on Linux, I've tried developing open source games and so on, and all the jobs out there are for, Microsoft, DirectX, whatever developers, and that's what they end up doing, which seems a little sad. But yeah, it's definitely true. We've got a question from the chat room. Everyone's chatting away as we're talking here. Someone was asking, how many patches do you get from civilians? Do you get a lot of patches to the engine from outside of your department and so on?
Yeah, we do. You know, there's several people who do it. We work very closely with a group at Alliance Science and Technology. And, you know, as a matter of fact, right about now, or I guess in half an hour, the rest of my team will be having a weekly phone call with them. So, you know, they provide patches, but we also get them from a lot of people in the civilian world who've, you know, found bugs and fixed them for us. Or as I mentioned earlier about the evolution of our stage tool, you know, we had one person who thought it would work much better as a plugin architecture. And frankly, we did too, but we just hadn't had anybody who was willing to pay us to do that. And he did it on his own and contributed back, and that's provided a huge advantage both to us and the entire Delta3D community.
Well, that's fantastic. I mean, that's music to our ears as open source development advocates, because that's the golden scenario, isn't it? When you're actually getting value added back by developers who you're not employing necessarily to work on it and so on, and then everyone shares the benefit.
Yeah, and that's what we love to do. And I mean, the other thing is that, you know, if you kind of look at the architecture of Delta3D, you know, I used the term direct developers of Delta3D a little while ago, but, you know, we literally have tens of thousands of indirect developers. And those are people who, you know, put in improvements to OpenSceneGraph, put in improvements to OpenAL, put in improvements to ODE, all the other open source projects that make up Delta3D. You know, that's the one thing that's kept it here. You know, I mean, normally when you look at game engine companies, they require huge numbers of people to keep their engine up to date and keep it moving forward. And we've been able to do that with, you know, since 2003, we've had somewhere between 1 and 7 engineers on the project. You know, normally probably about 3 or 4 would be, you know, the average number of engineers working here. And we've managed to, you know, stay fairly well up to date by doing it. And the only way we've been able to do that is that people are developing for the underlying projects that Delta3D uses and keeping Delta up to date. And they may have never even heard of Delta, but we really appreciate all their efforts.
Yeah, definitely. And what about contributing back to projects such as the ones that you're relying on and so on? Do you release patches downstream to them as well? Or upstream? I'm confusing myself now. But you know what I mean? Somewhere in the stream, the patches are going.
Exactly. Yes, we do. You know, whenever we add something, you know, a functionality is not there that we want it to have is, you know, and we want to add it, we'll make the determination whether it's better to add it to one of these other projects or add it to Delta. We've done quite a bit to Cal3D, which is the animation library. I think, you know, Eric Johnson, our technical director, has been one of the primary contributors to that for the past few years. Working on that, we've made patches to OpenSceneGraph, going back through those. And so we do try to give back wherever we can, you know, for a couple of reasons. A, you know, it's the right thing to do, but B, if we give it back, we don't have to maintain it, you know, which is a selfish reason for doing it. But we'd much rather have their community take care of that than, you know, take on that responsibility ourselves.
Excellent. It sounds brilliant. Obviously, as I said, it's music to our ears. That's the kind of thing we like to hear about people contributing code back and forth. I've actually got quite a, I don't know how to describe it, a flippant kind of comedy question for you. When I found out the project was going to be Delta3D, I went in to look at it, and I found out it was a military-related project, and my strange kind of brain immediately jumped to Chuck Norris and Delta Force and all the rest of it. So, would you call yourselves the Chuck Norris of open source engines?
We like to think ourselves of Chuck Norris. You know, it's actually, you know, yeah, I think that would be a good analogy to make. So.
Excellent.
We've been also called the little engine that could, which is, you know, probably closer to the truth than the Chuck Norris analogy, but we like that one too.
Oh, excellent.
Very good. Very good. Hey, so we've chatted for a bit, but we're just about running out of time here. So I wanted to just address a couple more issues. Is there anything that we haven't covered about Delta3D that you want to make sure our audience knows about?
No, I think, you know, I've got the main points. You know, I think it's a very good engine. I think, you know, I'd like people to go out there and try it. Come to our website, delta3d.org, and there are links there to our, you know, our page on SourceForge to download it from there. Give it a try. You know, see how it works for you. Also on our website, we've got lots of forums there, and our programmers check the forums fairly regularly, and also a lot of people in the community check them. So if you have any questions, if you run into any difficulty, you can go there. I guess the only other thing I'd want to say is that we have lots of, which we distribute with Delta3D, lots of test examples. And these are basically just example code that show off one part of Delta3D. So one to show, collision detection, one to show how Director works, one to show, how to change, different viewpoints, things like that. And those are really the best way to learn Delta3D as you're going through those. We also have lots of tutorials, which are good, but unfortunately we don't have the personnel to keep those up to date. So the tutorials may get a little bit old. But the test examples are always up to date, and they're the best way to learn Delta3D.
Now, can someone actually participate directly in your project in the sense that if I download this and start playing with it and I see, maybe I'm building something with it and I have a bug right away, can I sit alongside the sort of the inside developers, or is there just no artificial wall there, or is there still kind of a distinction there?
No, we try to be as open as possible. So if somebody finds a bug, if somebody says there's a bug in your code, go fix it. We don't, like any open source developer, we'd much rather say, it's open source, we'd like you to fix it. But, we'd be glad to sit there and talk with people and kind of say, give them some idea of what we would think the best way to fix it so that, their patch is more likely to be accepted when they contribute it back. And now, we try to do that. We're very big in, we try to do as much as we can for community building. We really appreciate that part of the open source world, and we'd like to, improve the Delta3D community there. And kind of what your question is, we worry that people have that idea, is that because we are a military group, there are some of us who are paid to use Delta as our job. We may not be too interested in getting community things coming back, and nothing could be further than the truth. We love, people putting inputs to Delta and submitting code and everything like that.
Is your repo open and your bug tracker open?
Yes, we have a public bug tracker out there using Bugzilla that we have out there. People can put bugs in there, and if they want to sign up to try to do them, that's great. If they do that, if they want to get involved, we have the info@delta3d.org email address, or the forums are a great way to get in touch with the people who work here, and can kind of talk about the architecture. We try to keep the architecture. We're trying to walk a thin line between the cathedral and the bazaar as we go down it, and so we try to keep things done in a certain way so that it makes sense, but we don't want to do it all ourselves. So, we'd be glad to kind of talk about our philosophy with somebody who wants to do a bug patch and is trying to figure out the best way to do it.
And is your repo open with your code history?
Yes.
And what do you use for that? SVN?
Yes.
Good guess. Well, I can always tell about the era of when the project started. If it started about 6 or 7 years ago, it was SVN. If it started about 2 years ago, it's almost certainly Git now. So I can almost tell just by listening to the start time. If it started 15 years ago, you still might be on CVS. So,
yeah,
boy, that would just be lovely.
We've discussed going to Git, with a lot of back and forth about that, because there are a lot of advantages to it, but we just haven't decided to make the move right yet.
Yeah, so I can highly recommend Git, of course, because it's my favorite version control system. I won't use anything else personally.
Right.
Okay, one last question, because again, I'll get screamed at if I don't ask this. Emacs or VI?
I hate to say that we generally use Microsoft Visual Studio for most of our programs. I know. Yeah. The reason is this. I've just lost all credibility. I realize it, and I should have just lied, but is that we have a free license for that, and we find that most of our developers out that are, we're kind of a little bit different from the normal open source, since we're very government and military related, is that most of our the people who are using Delta are using that. So by using that, it brings us closer to our customer base. Even though at heart, we feel one with the pure open source people. And personally, for me, it would be Emacs. So.
Oh, there we go. There we go. One redeeming point there. And one more chance to redeem yourself. Favorite scripting language?
Python. We use Python. I know you're a Perl guy, but
Right.
but when we were in there, when we first made the determination, Python seemed to be the better choice to go with.
Again, from your project starting 6 or 7 years ago, it's the timing of all that. Python was kind of the language of choice at that period of time, right? If you started again 5 or 6 years before that, you probably would have been a Perl shop as well. But that's okay. There's plenty of people still using Perl, so I'm not out of a job yet, so I'm okay with that. Well, it's been really great having you on the show, Perry. I'm sure we've introduced you and Delta3D to a huge new realm of audience. So expect flooding in your mailing lists and stuff like that coming up soon. And
Excellent.
I want to thank you for coming on the show.
Well, I'd really like to thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I love to talk to anybody about Delta3D and what we're doing. And, my email is McDowell at NPS, that's November Papa Sierra.edu.
That's so military.
Well, it is military, but people have trouble hearing either N or MPS.
Yes.
So I always make sure that everybody knows that it's November, not Mike. So
And the other part of it is Mike, Charlie, Delta, Oscar, Whiskey, Echo, Lima, Lima.
Very good. Yes, I figure that's okay. People can get that without it, but the NPS is a little bit rough at times.
That was because I have 270 hours in the left seat of a small plane.
Oh, excellent.
Yes, had to learn how to do that. All right. Well, great. Well, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Randall. I appreciate it.
That was Perry McDowell. He's the director, leader, grand poobah of the Delta3D project. So, Dan, what do you think?
I thought fascinating, very interesting guest. And as we kind of got into a little bit there, I was really curious about the differences in running a project where it's kind of funded by a big government-backed body rather than having to go out and raise funds quite the same. But it sounds as though it would be easy for us to think it's all a bed of roses for them and they just say, we want more money, and they get it. But it sounds like they really have to justify what they're doing as well. So that was very interesting.
Well, it's great to have this sort of opportunity to also, I'm thinking it from the other side, which is that, my tax dollars are paying for this to be funded. Yeah. And so it's great to actually have some way of having my tax dollars not just be to, buy brass and plating and stuff like that to get blown up in a field somewhere, but also to contribute back to some open source projects that I can get benefit back from that indirectly for that. Obviously, I get benefit from not being fired upon by the enemy, but but I mean, there's this tangible benefit from having it come back as open source for me. I really appreciate that, and I also like the fact that he does have the project does have a community outside of just the direct reports in the internal organization, because it's so often that projects that I haven't heard of are sort of still small, and so we don't know that there's an outside community. So I'm glad that we were able to establish that that's going on with that. And again, I find all this stuff fascinating in the sense of the visuals that you have to do to get a good simulation, the sort of physics that are involved, and the planning, the AI, as I asked about earlier, and so I'm glad that there's something that kind of brings all that together, and so people can go out there and build some really cool things with it if they want to. And hopefully, people are already doing that, I hear, but hopefully this conversation we've had in public today will help bring more people to the plate. Does that sound sensible?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, as you say, it's great that they're contributing back and they're doing all this. The AI stuff was interesting, although as I'm sure they hear this all the time, but this has moved significantly up my list of contenders for Skynet after hearing that, with the military connection as well. But it sounds like a great project, and it's great to see that they're using other projects, using and collaborating with other open source projects as well, which is the key. Not just taking their stuff and consuming it, actually giving back as well, which is the spirit of what this should be about.
And the advantage here of having the upstream projects that they were able to draw on also be open source allows them to pull it in, rather than having to write their own rendering engines, rather than having to write their own physics engines. They're able to draw on other people's projects, and not only draw on them, but the idea then of saying, well, it's just missing this feature, we'll write it and contribute it back to you. So really it becomes this huge ecosystem. It's just really the advantage of open source, and I'm really happy that it's working well for them as well. So yay. Good stuff.
Amen to that.
Speaking of open source, we have, that's the awkward transition for the week, which is, it wasn't awkward. I want to talk about who's coming up. If I can get my screen pulled out here and get rid of that. So sorry, nobody can see what I'm looking at, but it's getting in my way. So next week we have Chris Schoenerman, talking about Synergy, which is a great link-up tool. You can use one set of mouse and keyboard and use it with all the PCs on your desk, because you can just move the mouse across multiple screens and it just follows along with you, including cut and paste and all sorts of wonderful things for that. Randy Harper's going to join us for that one, because she's actually a heavy user of that software. Immediately following, we got Brian Call, Leif Hedstrom. I bumped into them both at OSCON a couple weeks ago, talking about Apache Traffic Server, which is a high-performance proxy and direct serving server, kind of like, think of like Nginx, but from the Yahoo side of things. Apache Traffic Server should be a really interesting project. Adam Armstrong, Observium, which is a network management and maintenance tool. Tomas Miraz, Live Cloud, one of the utilities that's basically used to work with cloud-based systems, bring up and down virtual systems and make that all manage. Kirst Moore is coming up after that, talking about PCBSD, which is the version of FreeBSD that's been specifically tailored for desktop use. Comes up with a nice desktop installer and stuff. And Randy Harper, FreeBSD girl, of course, is going to be back for that one as well. A lot of other people on the short list. We're always scheduling new people all the time. In fact, I'm just about to open up my Q4 scheduling, so you'll hear about a bunch of new names. If you go to twit.tv/floss, you can see the list of people we have upcoming. If you have a project in mind that is not on that list yet, we've got something like 200 names there, but if you have a project that's not on that list yet, have the project leader email me. I just had like 4 or 5 more pieces of email in the last couple of days specifically like that, and that's how they get on that list, because I'm already in chat with the project leader, and I know that they want to be on the show. That helps quite a well. You can also find out when we've got new guests being added, and also find out this week's guest by following us now on our new Twitter and Identica handles, Floss Weekly, all one word. That's, let's see, Foxtrot, Lima, Oscar, Sierra, Whiskey, Echo, Kilo, Lima, Yankee. So. I can't believe I just did that. Anyway, Floss Weekly, all one word. And the only things that goes out there are announcements about Floss Weekly. I do not push what I'm having for lunch on that particular handle. But if you want to find out what I'm having for lunch, follow me as Merlin, M-E-R-L-Y-N. If you follow me, you'll also find out that I am going to be in San Francisco the evening of August 18th. I'm going to be there for a Chris Marquardt photo workshop. We're having a sort of open attendance pre-workshop meetup. So if you had to be in the downtown San Francisco area, watch my Twitter handle for details on that. You can watch us live. You saw a couple times during the show, we were talking about this chat room that we're talking about. And yes, we have a live chat room that goes along with our live taping. It's at 9. Our show is taped 9:30 a.m. Pacific time, which is America/Los Angeles in the Olson database, but Pacific time, West Coast U.S. And you can figure that out in your time zone somewhere later. But we have a chat room, and we do actually watch the chat room while we're taping the show to get questions for our guests, as we did a couple times today. It was really cool. What else we got there? Yeah, so I'm also on Google+, by the way, Randal L. Schwartz on Google+. You can find me there. I do have invites, so if you need to be invited to Google+, if you get a hold of me through Twitter or my email at merlin@stonehenge.com, I will give you an invite. Has to be a gmail.com address, though, only. Don't send me other people's addresses. I hate it when people do that. I'm also going to be, Dan, this is right? I'm going to be on Linux Outlaws coming up on August 22nd. How can people watch that if they want to watch me on Linux Outlaws?
Yeah, well, at the moment it's live audio, but we were going through Ustream as well, so they can find it there. If you head to, if you either go to linuxoutlaws.com or sixgun.org/linuxoutlaws, all the information's on there on how to tune in. Great.
So you've invited me as a guest back in my second appearance there. Second? Second, one of those. Anyway, not the first. That's all I know.
No, it's not the first. I know that.
Great. And DragonCon, I'll be at DragonCon in Atlanta, September 1st through 5th, actually doing another presentation of the Lessons Learned from Flossing Weekly that I gave down at Fizzlay, and we had in the stream a little while back. One last plug for me. I'm going to be cruising down the west coast of the U.S. on yet another Insight cruise from September 8th through 19th, and I'll be stopping at various ports. So if you live on the west coast of the U.S., watch for my information coming out from tweets during that period of time. I know I'm going to be overnight in San Francisco, so if you're in the San Francisco area, I think on September 14th. I'm probably going to be wandering the city streets there aimlessly. I don't know, but we'll figure something out. I'll probably be looking for karaoke, the mint.com, or the mint is probably where I'll be going, the mint.com, the mint. That's probably enough plugs for me. Dan, what do you want to plug today?
Well, I've brought a big bag of plugs with me today, I'm afraid. Not bath plugs, just ordinary plugs. Yeah, I want to tell people to have a listen to Rat Hole Radio, which is a music show that I do. But we had, last couple of weeks ago, we had Alexei Sayle on as a guest, as a celebrity guest. He was in Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. He's the Sultan in that. And he's also a well-known alternative comedian in the UK, and he's a fellow Liverpudlian. And I bumped into him, and we recorded an interview for that. So if you go to ratholeradio.org, you can find that there, along with lots of interesting Creative Commons music and live performances and stuff. You can also check out Linux Outlaws, of course. If you go to linuxoutlaws.com, you can find all the information on there. We've got a calendar up for when we're actually taping and when you can tune in and listen to us. And we had Christian Heilmann from Mozilla on recently to talk about the new version numbering system, which has caused some commotion in the browser world. And also a thing called Boot to Gecko, which is a new project they're doing to run basically run Gecko on your phone as a kind of a basis for an OS, which is quite an interesting idea. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but you can hear him talk about that.
That's a great show. I listened to that show this morning. So yeah, it was a great show. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. And also, finally, OggCamp is on this weekend, which is our big, soiree that we throw every year. And this time it's down in Farnham, which is near London, and hopefully the rioting in London won't affect us. We have got a theory that maybe it's something to do with the impatience about OggCamp that people are getting upset about. But yeah, it's going to be really good. So if you go to oggcamp.org, you can find out more information there. We've got Simon's going to be there. Simon Phipps is coming along. He's going to talk for us. Karen Sandler's just announced she's coming as well, who's the executive director of the Gnome Foundation. She's going to be on a panel with some of the other folks there, so it should be really good. And go and check that out as well. It's the 13th and 14th, and you'll find all the information at oggcamp.org. If you want to find me personally, you can go to danlynch.org, and you find links to Twitter and all those kind of things there. My username's MethodDan, or on Google+. Unfortunately, my name isn't quite as unique as Randall's, so if you type in Dan Lynch, you will get about, 1,000 results or something, but you'll see a guy wearing a red hat fedora and holding a red guitar, and that's me. So you can find me on there as well. I think that's it. I think I've exhausted my plugs for now.
And somebody asked me, how are the riots affecting you? Is it anywhere near you, or is it, long ways away?
Well, it has been fairly close, actually. I'm not in London. I'm in Liverpool up north, and there hasn't been much happening up here. But I have to confess, when they said, oh, rioting in London, I thought it's not going to be long before it spreads here, because we have a bit of a history with that kind of thing. Yeah, a friend of mine had police vans and stuff outside his house the other night, and cars on fire and stuff, but that's about a mile or two from where I live. I'm actually in the centre of, I feel like an embedded reporter now, but I'm actually in the centre of Liverpool here. I'm looking out the window, that's why I keep looking over there. And it's very quiet. I'm right by the Catholic Cathedral. I haven't seen any problems. I went out last night and the whole place was dead, like a ghost town, because people had basically decided not to venture out. Me, being stupid, decided I had to go and see what was happening, so I went out, and just hundreds of police, but no actual rioting that I could see. So I think they were all a bit bored. They were all kind of sat around waiting for something to happen that didn't happen. But I'm glad that's the case. In London, it's been much worse, and in other parts of the UK as well.
Well, thanks for the immediate report on the street there from the man on the street. Embedded reporter, I like that. Very good. And Dan, thanks again for co-hosting the show with me. You're always welcome to co-host with me, because you have such great insights and areas that only slightly overlap with mine, so it's very nice. Thank you for joining me on the show again.
No problem. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure.
Very good. And I hear that music coming up, which means what it always means, which we're just out of time. So we'll see you again next time on FLOSS Weekly.